It was a quiet evening when the man walked home from work. He carried a small bag of groceries in his hand, the kind of simple items he bought every day. The streets were not too busy, and the sky was slowly turning golden as the sun set. He was tired, but there was also a calmness in his heart after finishing a long day. As he turned the corner near his house, he noticed something unusual. On the steps of a small closed shop, a little girl was sitting alone. She looked far too young to be sitting by herself on the street at that hour. Her tiny arms were wrapped tightly around her knees as if she was trying to keep herself warm. Her clothes were thin, her shoes worn out, and her face pale. The man slowed his steps. He felt an ache in his chest as he looked at her. She had big eyes, but those eyes looked heavy, filled with sadness and hunger. A child her age should have been smiling, running, or laughing, not sitting quietly like that with such a serious face. He thought for a moment, wondering if he should walk past her or stop. But something inside him told him he couldn't just ignore her. He walked closer and bent down so his voice would sound gentle. "Hello," he said softly. "Are you okay?" The little girl didn't answer. She just looked at him for a second, then quickly lowered her eyes. Her small hands clutched her knees even tighter. He tried again. "Are you hungry?" This time she nodded just once, shyly. She didn't speak, but her body told the truth. Her lips looked dry, and her face carried the look of someone who hadn't eaten for a long time. The man opened his grocery bag and pulled out some bread and fruit. He held it out carefully, not wanting to scare her. For a second, she hesitated, as if unsure whether she could take it. Then hunger won. She reached out with small, trembling hands and took the bread. She ate quickly, almost too quickly, as though she thought it might disappear if she didn't finish fast enough. The man felt his throat tighten. No child should have to eat that way, like food was a rare treasure. He gave her an apple next, and she bit into it, juice running down her chin. For the first time, he saw a spark of light in her eyes. He wanted to ask where her parents were, why she was alone, but he didn't want to overwhelm her with questions. He just sat there watching her eat, making sure she felt safe. "You can have more if you want," he said gently, opening the bag wider. She shook her head after finishing the fruit and whispered the smallest, "Thank you." Her voice was soft, almost like a breeze, but it was enough to touch his heart deeply. Before he could say anything else, she stood up, hugged herself tightly, and walked quickly down the street. He wanted to stop her, to ask where she lived, but she disappeared into the shadows before he could. He stayed standing there for a while, holding the empty bag, feeling both helpless and heavy inside. That night he couldn't sleep properly. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, those hungry eyes, that small thank you. He thought about how unfair life could be. Somewhere children were playing in warm houses with plenty of food, while this little girl had to sit on cold steps waiting for kindness from strangers. He wondered if she had a family, if she had anyone to protect her. The thought of her wandering the streets made him restless. The next morning, he walked by the same corner, hoping to see her again. But the steps were empty. The shop was still closed, and the girl was nowhere to be found. He stood there for a moment, staring at the empty spot, and sighed. Maybe she had moved to another place. Maybe she was safe with someone now. But in his heart, he knew the streets were not kind to children. The following days were the same. He went to work, came home, and each time he passed by that corner, he looked. Sometimes he even carried extra snacks in his bag just in case she appeared. But she didn't. Life went on, but he carried her memory everywhere. When he ate his meals, he thought of her empty stomach. When he lay on his comfortable bed, he thought of her sitting on cold stone steps. It was as if she had carved a permanent space in his thoughts. One evening, as he sat at his dining table eating soup, he imagined what it must be like for her. Did she sleep under a bridge? Did she have to search for food in bins? Did she cry at night when no one could hear her? He shook his head, pushing the bowl away. His appetite was gone. He whispered to himself, "I should have followed her that night. I should have helped more." But deep down he also knew he couldn't just chase a frightened child. Trust takes time, especially when life had taught her to be careful. The man lived alone. His house was simple but warm. For years he had followed the same routine: work, groceries, meals, and rest. He never thought much about loneliness, but since meeting the little girl, he started noticing the silence more. The sound of a child's voice, even just that small "thank you," had filled the emptiness for a moment, and now the silence felt heavier. He didn't know why this encounter had touched him so deeply, but he couldn't deny it. maybe because innocence mixed with suffering always carried the strongest weight. Every night he prayed silently that she would be safe. He wasn't even a very religious man, but he found himself whispering, "Let her find food. Let her find comfort. Let her not be alone." He thought of ways he could help if he ever saw her again. Maybe he could give her warm clothes, maybe some money, or even talk to someone who could protect her. The days stretched on, and still no sign of her. But the memory of that hungry child eating bread and fruit from his hand never faded. It became a story he carried in his heart, a reminder that sometimes even a small act of kindness can mean everything to someone in need. He didn't know then that this was not the end of their story. He didn't know that destiny had already tied his path with hers, and that soon she would return to his life in a way that would change everything forever. 2 days later, the man was watering his small garden in the evening. He had just come back from work, changed his clothes, and stepped outside with a watering can. The garden was his way of finding peace. He grew simple things, some flowers, a few herbs, and little plants that gave him joy. As the water sprinkled on the soil, he heard a faint sound behind the gate. At first he thought it was just a passerby, but then he heard a soft voice calling, "Mister." He froze for a second because that voice was familiar. Slowly he turned and his heart jumped. Standing there was the same little girl he had fed days earlier. This time she was not alone. She held the hand of a woman who looked weak and tired, her face marked by struggles. The woman's clothes were plain, her hair loosely tied, and her eyes carried both shame and sadness. Yet even in her tired look she stood tall, trying to appear strong for her child. The girl looked at him shyly and said, "This is my mom." The man dropped the watering can and quickly opened the gate. "Come in," he said warmly. They both stepped inside carefully, almost as if afraid to disturb his space. He guided them to a small wooden bench under the tree in his yard. The little girl smiled faintly, but the woman kept her eyes low. He noticed the way she held her daughter's hand tightly, like she didn't want to let go. "Would you like some tea?" he asked gently. The mother hesitated but then nodded. Soon he came out with 2 cups of warm tea and a plate of biscuits. The girl reached for a biscuit immediately, but then she stopped and looked at her mother first, as if asking for permission. The mother gave a small nod, and the child ate slowly, savoring each bite. The man sat with them and spoke softly. "I saw your daughter the other day. She was hungry, so I gave her some food. I was worried about her." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky. "She told me about you. That is why we came. I wanted to thank you myself." He smiled gently. "There is no need to thank me. Any person would do the same." But the mother shook her head. "Not everyone. Many people walked past us." "You stopped?" Her words made him pause. It was true. Many had probably seen the little girl and chosen to ignore her. The world often looked away from pain when it was too close. He felt a quiet respect for the honesty in her voice. After a moment, the woman began to explain. Her name was Amina. She had once lived in a small rented room with her husband and daughter, but her husband had left one night and never returned. She tried to manage by working small jobs, cleaning houses, washing clothes, but the money was never enough. They lost their room when she couldn't pay rent, and since then, life had been a fight every single day. Sometimes they stayed in a shelter, sometimes on a friend's floor, and sometimes on the street. As she spoke, her voice cracked. She looked down at her hands, ashamed, as if she thought her story was a burden. But the man didn't see her as a burden. He saw a mother who had been carrying too much weight, doing everything she could to keep her daughter alive. His chest grew heavy listening to her, but also full of respect. The little girl leaned against her mother, listening quietly, as though she already understood far more than her age should allow. The man realized this child had seen too much of life's harshness, and yet there was still innocence in her eyes, a small glow of hope that hadn't died. "Both of you are safe here," he said firmly. "Please eat, rest. You don't need to worry right now." The mother looked at him in surprise, as if kindness was something rare and unexpected. She whispered again, "Thank you." Her eyes glistened, but this time she didn't wipe away the tears. After finishing tea and biscuits, the mother tried to stand. "We should go." "We don't want to trouble you," she said softly. But the little girl tugged at her mother's hand and looked up at the man with pleading eyes. The man's heart softened instantly. "Please stay for dinner," he insisted. It's no trouble at all. The mother hesitated, but the smell of food cooking inside must have reminded her of how hungry they both were. Finally, she nodded. He invited them in, and they stepped into his small but tidy home. The little girl looked around with wide eyes, admiring even the simplest things: the curtains, the books on the shelf, the family photos. He served them rice and stew, warm and filling. They both ate quietly, but he noticed the way they closed their eyes for a second after the first bite, as though tasting comfort for the first time in a long while. The mother ate slowly, carefully, trying not to seem greedy, while the girl ate with small happy sounds, unable to hide her joy. The man sat watching them, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. After dinner, the mother offered to wash the dishes, but he gently refused. "You are my guest tonight," he said kindly. She lowered her head again, unused to such treatment. When they prepared to leave, the sky was already dark. He didn't want them to go back into the night, but he didn't want to pressure them either. Still, he couldn't stop himself from asking, "Where will you go now?" The mother paused. "There is a shelter," she said quietly. "But it is crowded and not always safe. Still, it is better than the street." Her voice carried resignation, not choice. He wanted to tell them to stay, but he kept silent. Instead, he packed some food in a small bag and handed it to them. "Please take this, at least for tomorrow," he said. The little girl smiled and hugged the bag tightly, her eyes shining as if he had given her the greatest gift in the world. "Thank you, mister," she whispered again. As they walked away into the night, the man stood at his doorway watching until they disappeared. His heart ached again, even stronger than before. He thought about the empty bed inside, the warm house, and the safety it offered. And then he thought about them, two souls wandering, looking for a place to belong. That night, as he lay in bed, the silence around him felt louder than ever. He realized that the little girl's visit had changed something inside him. It wasn't just about giving food anymore. It was about connection. It was about responsibility. He knew he couldn't simply go back to his routine now. Something bigger was beginning, though he didn't yet know how deeply it would shape his life. In the days that followed their first proper meal together, the man found his mind returning again and again to the mother and her daughter. He carried on with his daily work, but the quiet of his house felt different now. He could still hear the little girl's giggle when she discovered his bookshelf, the way she ran her small fingers along the spines of the books, as though they were treasures. He remembered the mother's soft voice as she tried to thank him, even though she looked too tired to speak. These images stayed with him, as vivid as though they were still there in his home. The next afternoon, while walking back from the store with some groceries, he saw them sitting under a tree near the end of his street. The little girl was playing with a stick in the dirt, drawing small shapes, while the mother sat watching her with a protective gaze. When the girl noticed him, her face lit up and she ran toward him, calling, "Mister!" He bent down to greet her, and the mother stood up slowly, giving him a small, shy smile. "You are here," he said kindly. "Why don't you both come back with me? It's getting hot outside." The woman hesitated for a moment, perhaps not wanting to intrude, but the girl tugged at her hand and whispered something. Finally, they followed him. He gave them cold water, and soon the girl was happily munching on a piece of fruit he had bought. That evening, something unusual happened. As the man prepared a simple dinner, the mother came into the kitchen and softly asked if she could help. At first he tried to refuse, but she gently insisted. "Please," she said, "I want to do something. You have already done so much for us." So he let her chop vegetables while he stirred the pot. She worked with quiet efficiency, her hands moving quickly, showing that she had done such tasks many times before. He noticed how carefully she checked the flavors, how she added small touches of spice that he would never have thought of. The food tasted richer that night, and they all shared it with laughter that came more easily than before. The little girl, who had been shy at first, was beginning to open up. She told him small stories in her childlike way, how she once had a doll, how she loved drawing on paper but now only drew in the dirt, how she wished she could go to school again. The man listened carefully, nodding and asking questions. Each word she spoke felt like a window into a world of innocence mixed with hardship. Later that night, after dinner, the girl helped sweep the floor while her mother quietly washed the dishes. The man watched them, a lump forming in his throat. They weren't behaving like guests. They were behaving like people who wanted to belong, like a family trying to show they could contribute. He didn't stop them because he saw how important it was for their dignity. The next morning he woke to find the little girl outside watering the plants with the leftover water from the night before. She smiled proudly when he walked out, showing him the flowers she had given water to. The man chuckled softly, patting her head. "You've done well," he said. She beamed, her face glowing with joy, as if she had just achieved something grand. Days turned into a rhythm. The mother and daughter began visiting more often, sometimes staying through the day. The man noticed small changes, how the girl's cheeks were no longer so pale, how her eyes carried more light, how her laughter filled the rooms of his quiet home. Even the mother began to look healthier, though her eyes still carried a shadow of worry. She often tried to repay him by cooking, cleaning, or fixing things in the house. He tried to tell her she didn't have to, but she always shook her head. "It is important for us to give back," she said softly. The neighbors, however, began to notice. Some whispered when they saw the woman and child entering his home. A few even asked him directly, "Who are they? Why are they here so often?" He only smiled politely and said, "They are friends." He didn't owe anyone an explanation, and in his heart he knew he was doing what was right. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, the little girl picked up a small piece of chalk she had found and began drawing on the stone pavement. She drew a house with smoke rising from the chimney, flowers around it, and 3 stick figures standing side by side. She pointed at each one. "This is me. This is Mama. And this is you, mister." The man froze, touched deeply. He didn't know what to say, so he simply smiled and nodded, his eyes moist. It was clear the little girl already saw him as part of her world, as someone who belonged with them. Her mother noticed too, and though she said nothing, the look in her eyes revealed gratitude mixed with unspoken hope. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments when the mother seemed distant, as though trapped in worry. She often sat quietly, staring into space, lost in thought. The man understood her struggles had been heavy, and trust wasn't built overnight. Still, he wanted her to know she wasn't alone anymore. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned orange, the man found the courage to ask her gently, "Do you plan to go back to the shelter?" The mother lowered her head, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't want to," she admitted, "but I cannot keep asking for your kindness. You have your life, your own responsibilities. I don't want to be a burden." He looked at her firmly. "You are not a burden. Neither of you. You are safe here. As long as you need this place, it is open to you." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time she didn't hide them. She whispered, "You don't know what this means to us." The man simply smiled, watching the little girl run around the garden, laughing as butterflies flew past her. In that moment, he realized his home was no longer just his. It was becoming theirs too. That night, as he lay in bed, he reflected on how quickly his life had changed. Just weeks ago, he had been living in quiet solitude, following the same routine day after day. Now his house was filled with voices, with warmth, with a sense of family he hadn't known he was missing. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, he felt he was exactly where he needed to be. The evening air was cool and the sky painted itself with streaks of pink and purple as the sun began to sink behind the horizon. The man, the little girl, and her mother sat at the dining table finishing a simple dinner of rice, vegetables, and warm bread. The girl's cheeks were fuller now, her laughter freer, and her eyes brighter. She looked like a flower that had finally found sunlight after days of rain. Her mother, though still carrying lines of worry on her face, now looked calmer, her shoulders a little less heavy. After they had eaten, the little girl leaned back on her chair, rubbing her small stomach with a smile. "That was so good, mister," she said, her eyes twinkling. The man chuckled. "I'm glad you liked it." Her mother gave him a look filled with gratitude. She whispered softly, "It's been a long time since she has eaten like this every day." "Thank you." The man shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me for something so small. Food is meant to be shared." The room fell into a peaceful silence, broken only by the little girl humming to herself. Then after a pause, the mother cleared her throat. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her scarf and her eyes looked down at the table. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Mister, I need to say something. My daughter feels safe here. I feel safe here too. We don't want to keep moving from place to place anymore. We want to live here, with you, if you allow us." The words hung in the air like a delicate thread. The man froze, taken by surprise. He had imagined something like this might come one day, but hearing it aloud was different. He stared at the mother, then at the little girl, who was now watching him closely, her small face filled with hope. The man leaned back in his chair, thinking deeply. For years he had lived alone, his house echoing with silence. He had never thought of himself as someone who would share his home with others. Yet in these past days his life had changed. His quiet evenings had been replaced with laughter, his meals with company, and his empty rooms with warmth. He thought of the little girl's drawing on the pavement, the house with 3 stick figures, her mother, and him. She already saw him as part of her family. He realized something important in that moment. It wasn't just that they needed him. He needed them too. Finally, he smiled softly. If you both want this, then this house is your home too. The little girl gasped with joy. She jumped out of her chair and ran around to hug him tightly. Really, mister? Really, she squealed. He nodded, patting her head gently. Really? The mother's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of sadness, they were tears of relief. She placed her hand over her chest, her voice trembling. You don't know what this means to us. You've given us back more than just a home. You've given us hope. From that evening onward, the rhythm of the house shifted completely. The little girl's laughter became a daily melody, her voice filling every corner of the house. She woke up early and helped water the plants, her small hands carrying the watering can with pride. Her mother took over the kitchen, preparing meals that carried the warmth of care and the flavors of home-cooked love. The man returned from work each day to find the smell of food, the sound of laughter, and the comfort of family waiting for him. The neighbors continued to whisper, but he no longer cared. When people asked, he only said, "This is my family now." Some raised their eyebrows, but others smiled quietly, understanding more than words could explain. The man began noticing small changes in himself too. He was more patient, more thoughtful. He started leaving work with a smile, knowing someone was waiting for him. He even began planning weekends differently, taking the little girl to the park, buying her crayons and paper so she could draw properly, and listening as she proudly showed him her pictures. She always drew the same 3 figures together, always with a house behind them, always with smiles on their faces. The mother also began to open up slowly. One evening, as they washed dishes together, she told him about her past. She explained how she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, but had to give up her studies when she married young. She spoke about how she had struggled after her husband left, about nights when she didn't eat so her daughter could. Her voice carried both pain and strength, and the man listened quietly, respecting the courage it took to share. "You've been stronger than anyone I know," he said sincerely. The mother lowered her gaze, whispering, "I only did what I had to do. For her." She glanced toward her daughter, who was busy coloring in her notebook, humming happily to herself. The man felt admiration growing inside him. It wasn't just kindness that kept her going, it was love, fierce and unshakable. He realized that this woman, though tired and scarred by life, carried a heart larger than most. Together, the 3 of them built routines. They ate breakfast together, shared stories in the evenings, and sometimes even sang songs as the little girl clapped her hands in delight. On weekends, they cleaned the house as a team, laughing as water splashed and soap bubbles filled the air. The once quiet home was now alive with joy and warmth. But even in their happiness, the mother sometimes looked worried. She often stayed awake longer at night, sitting by the window in thought. The man noticed but didn't press her. He knew it would take time for her to truly believe that they were safe now. One night he found her sitting alone outside looking at the stars. He joined her quietly and said, "You don't need to be afraid anymore. You both belong here now." She turned to him, her eyes shining under the moonlight. "I know, but after everything we've been through, it's hard to believe something so good is real. I keep fearing it will be taken away." He shook his head gently. "No one will take this away. Not while I'm here." Her lips trembled into a smile and she whispered, "Thank you. You've given my daughter her childhood back. And you've given me something I thought I lost forever. Peace." At that moment, the little girl appeared sleepily at the door, rubbing her eyes. "Mama, mister, are you coming inside?" she asked in her tiny voice. They both smiled and stood up, walking back inside with her between them. The man realized then that family was not just about blood. Family was about love, trust, and the choice to stand together. He had opened his door to a starving little girl, and in return he had been given a family he never knew he needed. The days that followed felt like a new season in the man's life. His once silent house had now become a home filled with sounds, laughter, and the gentle rhythm of family. He woke up in the mornings to the little girl's excited voice asking if she could water the plants. He often came home from work to find her drawings pinned to the fridge or resting on the table, pictures of houses, gardens, and always three smiling figures standing together. Her mother had taken charge of the kitchen, and the meals she prepared brought warmth to every evening. It was as if the walls of his house, once so quiet, had learned how to breathe again, but one evening stood out. After dinner, as they were sitting together, the little girl suddenly asked a question that made everyone pause. "Mister," she said softly, "can we stay here forever? Not just for some days, forever." The man looked at her mother. Her face was full of emotion, her eyes both hopeful and afraid. The man leaned forward and placed his hand on the table gently. "Yes," he said with certainty. "This is your home now. Forever if you wish." The girl squealed with happiness, running around the table before hugging both him and her mother. The mother tried to hold back her tears but failed. She whispered, "You have given us more than shelter. You have given us life again." From that night onward, the bond between them grew even stronger. The little girl started calling him uncle and sometimes even papa by mistake. Each time he only smiled and hugged her tightly, feeling his heart fill with a love he never thought he would know. He had no children of his own, but now it felt as though life had chosen this path for him, to be the father figure she needed. The mother, too, began to change. She no longer walked with her head lowered. She smiled more, sang softly while cooking, and even laughed at her daughter's little jokes. Her eyes, once heavy with fear and sorrow, now carried light. She spoke to the man more openly, sharing her dreams of one day finding steady work, of giving her daughter a chance to go back to school, of building a life with dignity. The man listened carefully and reassured her. "We will make it happen," he said. Step by step together, they began building routines like a real family. On Saturdays, they went to the park where the little girl ran freely, playing with other children while her mother and the man sat on a bench watching proudly. On Sundays, they cooked special meals and shared stories late into the evening. The neighbors, once curious and doubtful, slowly began to accept this new family. Some even brought small gifts for the girl, books, toys, or clothes, because they saw how happy she was. One day, the man surprised the girl with a backpack and school supplies. "This is for you," he said. Her eyes widened with excitement. "Does this mean I can go to school again?" she asked. The man nodded. "Yes, it's time you returned to learning. You are too bright to be kept away from books." The little girl hugged him tightly, crying happy tears. Her mother sat quietly nearby, her face glowing with pride and relief. The first day of school was emotional for all of them. The little girl wore a simple uniform, her hair tied neatly, and carried her new bag proudly. As they walked her to the gate, she turned back and waved with a smile so wide it melted their hearts. The man and her mother stood side by side watching her walk in, both wiping tears from their eyes. That evening, when she returned home, she was full of stories about her teacher, her classmates, and the drawings she had made. She showed them her notebooks with pride, and the man listened as if every word was the most important thing in the world. For him, her education was not just about books, it was about giving her back the childhood that hardship had stolen. Life was not without its challenges. There were still bills to pay, responsibilities to manage, and moments of uncertainty. But they faced them together. The man often reminded the mother, "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. We are a family now." And she, in return, supported him by making the home warm, caring for him when he was tired, and filling the house with meals that tasted of love. The little girl blossomed in this new life. She laughed more, studied harder, and dreamed bigger. Sometimes she would sit by the man's side, drawing pictures of a future she imagined. She often drew three figures standing in front of a large house with the sun shining above them and flowers all around. "This is us," she always said proudly. One night, as the three of them sat under the stars in the garden, the mother spoke quietly. "I never thought I would find peace again. I thought my life was only about surviving day to day, but you gave us a home, you gave my daughter her smile back. How can I ever repay you?" The man shook his head gently. "You don't need to repay me. You already have. You brought joy into this house. You gave me a family when I didn't even realize how much I needed one. That is more than enough." She looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. And for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to truly believe that good things could last. From then on, their lives intertwined fully. They celebrated small victories. Her daughter bringing home good grades, the garden blooming with new flowers, even quiet evenings spent together. Every day carried meaning, because they shared it. The man often thought back to the first day he saw the little girl sitting alone on the steps of that closed shop. If he had walked past her without stopping, his life would still be empty, his house still silent, and his heart still unaware of what it was missing. By feeding a starving child that day, he had unknowingly opened the door to a destiny he never could have imagined. Now, he no longer lived for himself alone. He lived for the smiles of a little girl who called him Papa by accident, for the gratitude of a mother who had finally found peace, and for the bond that had turned strangers into family. His home was no longer just walls and a roof. It was filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a shared future. And so, what began as a small act of kindness on a street corner grew into a story of family, hope, and second chances. The man, the mother, and the little girl became inseparable, bound not by blood but by something even stronger, the choice to love and care for each other. Together they built a new life, proving that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most beautiful forever.